Welcome to the First Right Podcast, a weekly conservative news show brought to you by Restoration of America. I'm Doug Truax, founder and president of Restoration of America. Today we are blessed to have FBI whistleblower Steve Friend, a brave patriot who's exposing politicization of the FBI against conservative Americans. Hi Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, so before we get into details, just give the audience a quick overview of what drove you to go to the FBI and your career and things like that.
Well, I was a police officer in Savannah, Georgia for a number of years, eventually applied and was taken on by the FBI in 2014. Because of my law enforcement background, I was assigned to Indian reservation work in northwest Iowa and northeast Nebraska for the first 7 years of my career, which is really great. It's a small niche in the FBI. Got a chance to do a lot of casework, opened up about 200 cases, arrested about 150 violent criminals. Eventually transferred to Florida in the summer of 2021 with the understanding that I was going to be working child exploitation, human trafficking cases. But after a couple of months, was reassigned to work domestic terrorism issues on the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And at that point is when I was introduced to the January 6th investigations and some of the rule violations that have been going on with the FBI.
Yeah, so get into that a little bit more though. So what were you starting to see that really drove you to the point? I mean, you get there, you got good intentions about everything. It's not a perfect organization, but I'm sure you had, a favorable view of the FBI, and then you start seeing certain things, and then it drives you to this point. So help us understand what it was you were looking at that got you to this point.
Well, the FBI has a rule book, essentially. It's called the DIOG, the Domestic Investigation Operations Guide, and it sort of spells out how to carry an investigation forward. I was very familiar with it, having done all the casework that I'd done before. If you follow those rules, January 6th should be one case from Washington, D.C., run by those agents, and if they need work done in the field, they would cut leads, essentially request work to be done by other agents. But the decision was made instead to open up separate cases for each individual person and spread those cases around the country and to assign them to the offices where those individuals lived. That is within the rules of the FBI. It's very atypical, but once that decision was made, the agents that had those cases and the offices that had those cases were solely responsible for bringing those cases forward. When I started to look at the January 6th cases, though, and talking to my colleagues who had been doing it for a number of months, they were answering to Washington, D.C., even though they were the case agents on those cases. So the question I asked was why? What's the benevolent, benign reason for that? And they were told that it was to get buy-in from the field. And that could mean one thing being that the FBI doesn't believe its workforce is capable of taking on cases with the great gusto that's necessary unless their name's on it, which is kind of hollow. And the other reason could be because the FBI wanted each individual field office to meet its predetermined metrics on domestic terrorism for the year and create a statistical narrative that makes it look like domestic terrorism is on the rise around the country, when really all of those case numbers are stemming from one 4-hour incident at the Capitol on January 6, 2021.
So talk to that a little bit more in terms of this. It looks like this effort to inflate numbers around domestic terrorism. Like, what does that look like typically in before January 6th, and what is happening now that is starting to skew it at least as much as you know?
Well, in my experience, and I think anybody who's a consumer of the news knows that the demand for domestic terrorism vastly outstrips the supply. I think that the focus on national security since September 11th has transitioned from potential threats to the homeland abroad to then transition to potential homegrown terrorists with sympathies to potential outside threats. And now we're digging into homegrown domestic terrorisms, which have a certain ideology, which is convenient for the administration that tends to be in ruling power. And in this case, they're pinning that on domestic terrorism, white nationalism. But if you actually examine the number of cases that are righteous versus all the cases that are stemming from January 6th, which again should be one case, but is now 1,000, if not growing to 2,000 cases. It just creates this false dynamic. It moves the Overton window over to the point where now we're saying half the country that votes for a particular candidate for president is a potential terrorist.
Yeah. So it looks like, what is happening then is typically, to your point, there's a lot of decentralization based on geographies for the FBI, makes sense, right? If the case happened here, this office handles it, things like that. But if you get to this place where the people that are overly politicized at the top of the FBI and out in DC, and they want to drive this narrative that all domestic terror is increasing so they can use it politically, this is the way to do it. You just get together and say, hey, why don't we spread this out and just make all these new numbers, and then it supports what we're after, right? That's what's going on.
Yes, and the FBI has the reputation of being the uniform aggregator of all statistics around the country pertaining to crime, and it has that that FBI logo on there that gives it their righteous label, so everybody takes it with without having any sort of skepticism that anybody that's parroting those stats is taking them in good faith and that they're honest, and in fact they're really not. They're manipulative, and they're creating this false impression. And it's just not honest, and folks need to be aware of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so sad to watch this happen. When I grew up and when you were growing up, everybody's like, oh, the FBI integrity, we felt good about it. But the longer this kind of stuff goes on, it's like you said, half the country for sure is going, what the heck has happened here? And the trust in the organization in general, it's getting to a really low level. And so I don't, who knows what the future portends here for the FBI, but this is really tough stuff. And also, I was going to ask you about, we watch these SWAT style raids on these, Roger Stone and obviously Mar-a-Lago, but then just people that are just out there associated with January 6th and like possible misdemeanors. An entire FBI SWAT looking team shows up at their house and does a raid. I mean, it's just unbelievable. What's the take over there at the FBI amongst the people you've talked to that don't they see that that's just completely over the top?
Yes, it's derivative of a couple of factors. One, I was on a SWAT team when I was in my assignment at the Omaha division, so I did for 5 years. I'm a believer in SWAT. I think it's a good tool in the tool belt for law enforcement. But the FBI is a professional law enforcement organization, prides itself on using the least amount of force necessary to bring somebody into custody safely. What's gone on, though, with these January 6 individuals and with folks, that were praying outside of abortion clinics and were being arrested, is the punishment is the process now at this point. So there's a subjective spectrum for when it's appropriate to use SWAT, but it's pretty loose. You can sort of contrive a way to use it, and I think that that's being used as a weaponization. And I also think that there's pressure to use SWAT because there's budgets attached to it. If it's a tool you have and you're not using it, your budget gets cut. And then the FBI is also fond of bringing everything that it possibly can to bear. We'd rather have it, not need it, than need it, not have it. So many times on these arrests, you'll see 30 agents when 4 would suffice, just because we want to have that resource available if it's there. And a lot of these agents are brand new. They're probationary agents, and they have to check the box on certain things in order to be, a alpha probation and a regular agent. And if you work in a SCIF and you work in national security and counterintelligence, you're just not going to have the opportunity to participate in a lot of arrests. So a lot of times when there is an arrest, a lot of these new folks jump all over it, and they're just walking around with their blue raid coat or their brand new kit. And that's why whenever I see these videos, you can tell who the new agents are because they have the brand new kits that have no dust on them or anything like that. It hasn't been sitting in the back seat of a car for very long.
Right. It's like at the end of the football game when they bring everybody in that hasn't played all season, right? It's like, let those guys get on the field, right? So,
that's right. No grass stains.
Yeah, right. So but that's a great point. I mean, I remember this before all this politicization happened, that it was part with the FBI. It's like you guys were always good about not losing any agents, in operations because of this concept right here. Just, you got the stuff, bring it with you, make sure there's no situation where you feel outgunned or whatever else. And so, but that was all well and good when it was just like, hey, they're going after the criminals and that's important. But then you get into this politicization thing and they keep doing what they're doing. It makes everybody really nervous. Like, what are these guys up to? So it's totally get the concept, but yeah, using it this way is scary stuff. And I was going to ask you too about the January 6th in general. So, we're kind of watching things, looking as much video as we can and stuff, and you see people being let through barricades, and people say, hey, come over this way and go in here, and then there's the Ray Epps thing. And I mean, what's your take on the actual day and what you know about it now, and as your thinking changed as time has gone on based on some new evidence that maybe you're seeing?
Well, I've had conversations with some people who were there, and really their future is in jeopardy. And it was for people that were not even entering the building. As we found out a week ago, there's going to be another 1,000 cases coming forward from the DOJ. They're going to charge folks that were standing on the lawn outside the Capitol. And I think that releasing the 14,000 hours of surveillance footage and allowing essentially, we're going to crowdsource watching that. I don't think any individual is going to be able to sit down and watch it all. But I think that a lot of insight into what went on that day will come out. And certainly it's the people's house. We should have access to that. That's not a security issue. Nobody's under any delusions that the U.S. Capitol is not under surveillance at all times from all angles. And in talking to folks, who were there and got permission from police officers to walk in, it's definitely it raises my spider senses quite a bit. I was on the takedown aspect of the Gretchen Whitmer case, and I saw the Venn diagram of that case as it's come out with a lot of overlap with the January 6th case. So I think that sunlight is the best disinfectant. There needs to be radical transparency with this. If it's the largest and most important case in the history of the FBI, as leadership has continued to hammer home in the media, then the full show should be seen. We should pull the curtain back. America should see all the details of it, so we can all form an intelligent and informed decision on what really went on that day.
That's right. That's so true about so much of what's going on in our country. We just need transparency. We're not going to take anybody's word for it right now. It's just the time we're in this country. You just got to lay it all out there, especially if you think it's that important, like what you just said. It's just they got to put it out there. So, well, hey, I could speak on behalf of our audience. Thank you so much for your bravery and your courage in doing this. I understand you're still technically with the FBI, but not getting paid. Is that right? How's that working right now?
Yes, technically I'm indefinitely suspended. My security clearance was suspended. They're doing an investigation, which, in speaking to my attorneys, it's basically a process where they drag it out as long as possible in the hope that you'll resign. My security clearance was suspended for basically raising the alarm on January 6th, and then also they told me that I improperly accessed the employee handbook. So it's skirting whistleblower protection laws by weaponizing the security clearance revocation process. So that's a whole other issue for maybe the new upcoming church committee to look at when they finally convene. Yeah.
Well, like you said a minute ago too, it's going to be, I think your role going forward is going to be even more important because, like what you said, there's 1,000 people standing on the lawn on January 6th that they're going to come after. So this is only going to get worse going forward. So really appreciate what you're doing. Is there some place we could go to help fund your deal, or is a website or anything you got working?
Yeah, right now, I've sort of pooled my intellectual resources with Kyle Seraphin, who's the other outspoken FBI whistleblower, and a few others who have been anonymous. And we have opened up a Give, Send, Go for folks who want to contribute, and all those go to other whistleblowers, not myself. We're collecting, and that's Kyle Seraphin's Give, Send, Go page. And people can follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter @RealSteveFriend. I'm on Truth Social @Real_SteveFriend. But it looks like I might be shadow banned on Twitter, so you might have to go directly to my page to see the content.
Shocking. Well, I think that's so important. I bring that up with giving you getting you and the other guys some money because, often in this world we're living in, it just does come down to you get canceled, they come after you, they take away your livelihood, right? And that's a brutal thing to go through with, you got a family, you got all these things, we all have our responsibilities. So it's super important that if people are brave like you and great patriots, love the country more than you love anything else at this point in terms of your career, you come forward, the rest of us have got to step up and help you get through it. And there will be a better day because being on the side of truth is always better than anything else, man. So appreciate all you're doing, and you hang in there, Steve, and we'll keep watching, okay?
I will. Won't give up the fight ever. God bless you.
All right, God bless you. All right, that's our show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in and for supporting conservative media. Don't ever forget that by working together and staying diligent, we conservatives can bring our country back to true greatness. Until next week, let's all keep praying that God will continue to bless America.
First Right, a new kind of news summary without the liberal slant. Every morning, in your inbox, always free. Subscribe by texting First Right to 30161. That's First Right, all caps, one word, to 30161.